Welcome to Grey Cliff. I'm Anna Kaplan, Executive Director, and I'm standing in front of the main house here on our historic site. Grey Cliff was designed in 1926 by Frank Lloyd Wright for Isabel and Darwin D. Martin, and it was meant to be their summer home on Lake Erie. He designed the two houses to be in harmony with the natural surroundings, especially the lake. He used materials directly from the site, including rock from the 60-foot cliff, Tichenor limestone, and his design really incorporates views of the water. We are thrilled to be hosting Sarah Braman's sculpture on our historic site. This is unlike anything we've ever done before. And the exhibition allows us an avenue of access that inspires people around contemporary art, contemporary sculpture, and really highlights Frank Lloyd Wright's design intentions at the same time. The exhibition is on view through March 19th, and the way to experience it is to book a guided tour. We have art-specific tours running weekly. For all the information, visit experiencegreycliff.org.
Hi, I'm Andrea Alvarez, and I'm Assistant Curator at the Buffalo AKG Art Museum and one of the co-curators of Sarah Braman Finding Room here at Grey Cliff Estate. And this is my co-curator, Zach Baylor, Public Art Coordinator at the AKG. We're thrilled to be here with the artist Sarah Braman to have a conversation about these artworks, to walk through the exhibition, and to learn from her about her perspective on these works.
Sarah, thank you so much for joining us. We're really excited to have this conversation. Before we get started, I was wondering maybe you can kind of give a little introduction to yourself.
Sure. Thank you both so much. My name is Sarah Braman, and I actually was born not too far from here in Tonawanda, and I currently live and work in Amherst, Massachusetts, basically between Amherst, Massachusetts and New York City.
We're standing in front of one of the first interior works that visitors to Grey Cliff will see. This is a piece called Paula. And something we've heard a lot and something that we talked about a lot when we were working on putting this show together was how these works are affixed to themselves, what the construction is like. Are they bolted together, screwed together? How is this piece sitting here in front of us?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, I'm thinking of some of the other pieces in the room. Sometimes the pieces are physically fixed, like bolted or screwed together. In this case, these three different parts, this glass cube, this wood, piece of carved wood in the chair are actually they're just placed together. So there's a lip on the back of the glass cube here that holds that into the wood, and then the wood is just obviously sitting on the chair. So they're just held together by their own gravity.
There's something that just feels so precarious to that, as the borrowers of this artwork, thinking about like, okay, we're just gonna place it, and there's this lip, and it's a half-inch big, and it's just the glass is just gonna stay there. And I love this sort of the trust that you have in the construction, and it just gives this sort of the pieces just feel so sort of cohesive and whole. Like there is no doubt that they're gonna hang together, right? Both in sort of the way that they feel compositionally, and also in sort of the way that you talk about the way that they're constructed, these lips and these very like small details that you do to make sure that the construction works, right? And it is really precarious, and it is carefully balanced, but it's all predetermined and really well crafted. One of the things that for me is really striking with Paula in particular is this chair. It's a chair that feels so familiar, right? You know, in an American household, if it wasn't in, you know, my house or your house, or it was in your neighbor's house or your friend's house, you went over to their house, someone's house for dinner. These are the sort of the chairs that we knew of sort of in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, I think, around a dining room. And so it feels so familiar that placing it in the context of this artwork with these really unfamiliar objects on top creates a really sort of jarring material sort of juxtaposition. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about sort of that relationship between the familiar and the strange.
Sure. Yeah, I like that question. I think it speaks to something that I hadn't thought about so much until you asked the question, but I definitely tend towards furniture that's kind of like that you would see around. I mean, the things are either like from a school or from an institutional setting or from yeah, like you say, like a pretty normal household. Usually, I tend not to like, I mean, partly because it's what I can find on the side of the road or people are throwing out or at the thrift store, but I tend not to use like, you know, high-end modernist furniture or anything like that. It's just, yeah, like you said, it's things that, you know, maybe have passed in and out of probably many people's life and feel familiar and comforting. And also, I guess, a little bit to what the second part of that question or observation that you had about the strange or something that maybe isn't quite so familiar to a normal domestic setting, mixed with this very kind of everyday object is, and this kind of evolved in the work and presented itself to me slowly over time. Is it does you know, in this wasn't ever a plan, but in hindsight, working with the transparent glass and the color, and sort of a very intentional arrangement of this glass and inviting in translucence and projection, and actually like inviting in light to be part of the way the phenomenon of the sculpture and the way the sculpture works for me, has tended to like sink in a way that it's really inviting or materializing or bringing to surface like a spirit. So, you know, we have these, and maybe that there's a way that if we're going to bring spirit into the conversation, then we can also think about it for the chair too, you know, and for whatever else, for the, you know, the toilet brush or the, you know, the desk or the broom or anything else. And I think what you were asking kind of was getting at that. At least that's what it was for me.
There's just this kind of, I think in some conversation that we've had over the last couple of years, I remember we talked a little bit about sort of the rubbing up against the between like the spiritual and the mundane that happens when you do colored glass in anything, right? Because we think about mosques and churches and it is very much what you're doing here too. And I hadn't heard you talk about it in relationship to a sculpture like Paula. And it's true. I mean, you are sort of imbuing all of the objects that are part of this sculpture with that same sort of sacred specialness. Or asking why not.
Exactly, or the other way around, like it's already there. So, you know, let's see if we can look at it. For sure. And I think with this piece too, I mean, it's kind of hard also not to use a chair without talking about people. So, you know, sometimes it feels like, okay, this is like carrying the spirit of, you know, ghost or whatever, just kind of like, you know, where we are when we sit ourselves in a chair, and, you know, can can we like highlight like the interior life of whatever human might be passing through this bit of furniture or this house.
Yeah, like the reference that you kind of have for a lot of these works comes through when you speak about them. Something I've noticed that you do and that I've picked up as a habit myself when talking about your works is like personifying them. You really give them a lot of life. Andrea and I are lucky enough to have a bunch of questions that came to us from different tours and from social media about your work. And one of the questions that we received was, how do you title these works? Specifically this piece, Paula. Mm-hmm. And who is Paula, or why is it called Paula?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. And actually in this particular piece, it's not really titled after one specific person. There are other pieces in the show, like Cooking for Phil in the other room, which is has my husband's name in the title, which is very personal. And although I have known Paula, this piece in particular feels more like an amalgamation of women that I've known, and thinking about it maybe more like a writer, if they're a character in a nonfiction, in a fictional book, it might just be an amalgamation of people in their life and some from the imagination. But while it might conjure up like really specific feelings in me, it's also pretty open that way in terms of just creating a mood or spirit of some woman's humanity. So.
Sarah, we got a question sent in to us about this work, friend, from Matt in Buffalo, who recently came and saw this work on a tour. And it was mentioned during the tour that Friend is one of your personal favorite pieces in the exhibition. He was wondering why, and I was hoping you could explain that.
Sure. Well, I'm not sure if it's a favorite, but it definitely, it's a piece that we live with in our home. So it's a piece that I get to be with a lot, and so it's kind of have developed a relationship with. Yeah, and I think it does. You know, when I'm living with a piece of with anything, you just get to have a more intimate relationship, and like seeing the light, you know, come through and the different things that happen during the day. I can really just. I guess I just have gotten to appreciate this piece more than other works that maybe kind of live in the studio or go somewhere else, and I don't get to be with them. Yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's really sort of special and interesting about this work in particular is that, you know, you can sort of see the construction in a way. You can see sort of the insets where the glass is sort of cut to sit. And so it got one of our audience members thinking, this is another question from the audience, that for this work, and then also more broadly in your practice, when you're working, what is the sort of construction process like? Are you sort of working with a vision in mind and a goal, or is it sort of just seeing how things develop as they go? And then I'll sort of tack on to that, my wondering is, are you working on one sculpture at a time or multiple sculptures?
Well, definitely working on multiple sculptures at a time, and it really, to me, it feels a lot like tending a garden, or, you know, where different things are kind of growing. And yeah, I seldom meaning occasionally I'll have like a really clear vision for something, and certainly for the works that are outdoors, you have to kind of eventually settle on a vision. But the works really just evolve out of like playing with the material, and like I'll start like with this piece. I probably started by taking the large log and just started doing a carving without really understanding exactly how that was going to function in the later piece. Like, and probably it like was tipped over on different sides and then, you know, came to rest. And then, yeah, sometimes I'll even like put together glass into like open cubes or start a cube shape without really knowing what it's gonna interface with. So it's definitely more on the organic side, and things might move from one sculpture to another and back and like that.
Have you ever included something in a sculpture, you know, maybe even sent it out on view somewhere, and then it comes home then you know, a little desk part moves to go somewhere else?
Yes, I mean, I'm pretty much anything that comes back to the studio. I mean, there's something like this moved into the house, so I probably wouldn't have taken it apart, but things that come back into the studio, sometimes to the gallery's dismay, become taken apart and made into other things, for sure.
That philosophically, that sort of makes me wonder, sort of where does the art object start and material begin, or material start and the art object begin?
Yeah, I think that feels like also feels like sometimes if like I'll construct one of these cubes either fully or partially, and then once it's up and going and living in the studio, it feels kind of like a found object. So it's like, you know, in that way, it's almost like I'm creating a bunch of found objects that can then kind of get rearranged and find their way and find their position with each other.
I love the way, like, thinking about that is sort of, once they sort of, you live with them in the studio and then they take on, you know, whether it's a certain amount of time or a certain amount of cohesion between those materials that you put together, somehow they become a found object. I love thinking about that. You know, it's just like there's some marriage that happens there in the studio that then these objects then sort of take on a life of their own, and then become found objects, just like the sort of, you know, untouched chair that you found on the sidewalk.
Definitely. I mean, especially like a lot of the wood like the wood parts, they'll be in my studio for quite a long time, either cut or uncut, before they make it into a sculpture. And in Massachusetts, like that big wood piece was part of another piece that got recycled. So there was, yeah.
It's a good conversation between all the works. Yeah.
In so many of your pieces, Sarah, we see immediately your use of found objects. In this piece, there's the book and wood, and I know that there's a bit of a story about this table, and there's another one in one of the works upstairs. I don't know if you want to talk about your use of found objects and maybe this table in particular.
Sure. This table and the table upstairs is one of a set of 3 stacking tables that were in my granny's house growing up, and where the glass sits, this was a glass panel on the top. So it was 3 glass tables that stacked together and would come out for snacks. And, you know, often I'll just I have taken things just from our house. You know, there's plenty of place to find furniture, like side of the road or Salvation Army or the dump, all sorts of places. But I definitely, things have come through our home that are now part of sculpture.
How does that relationship happen? Do those pieces kind of speak to you, or are you looking for a form and so you go off hunting for that, or?
Yeah, it can be a little of both. Sometimes it's just like what's around. And I remember my uncle gave me a couch a long time ago, and he was moving and gave me an old couch that was in our house for a while, and then I actually built a sculpture in the house around the couch, and then it got moved to a gallery. And I remember he was a little bit like, and when we talked about it, he was fine with it, but it just, it hadn't occurred to me, like, oh yeah. But so things can just, evolve maybe either in the house or, I worked for a long time, literally I didn't have a studio, so I worked in our living room or in the dining room. So that definitely made things more, anything was fair game.
Yeah. There's something so as an art historian, you just sort of live for these stories, these moments of like being able to sort of read a biographical moment into an artwork. Mm-hmm. So knowing for this work, for reading that this, was a table that belonged to your granny, and then to know that it's connected to another artwork, mm-hmm. It just gives like a richness to this object and to my understanding of you and your work in a way that's really special. Mm-hmm. I think just adding a little bit of that element of biography. And something else that the sort of found objects add, of course, I'm really drawn. This is, when we think about some of your other sculptures that include books, there are multiple books. But this is, very specifically, you've made this sort of bookshelf for a single book. Mm-hmm. And it's called The Endangered Ones, and it's a book of endangered species. Can you talk a little bit about, why did you select this book for the sculpture and what sort of its importance is? Or if it's not.
Yeah, no, it definitely, yes. What do you think? I'm kind of interested. I'm not just trying to throw that back at you. I'm really like curious before I say anything, like how coming to it, what do you think about?
So for me, at the beginning, the engagement with it is kind of like a formal one. Mm-hmm. So it's this green that sort of has a similar saturation to the other colors, and then the gold text feels appropriate with the legs. And so it's like almost like you could have chosen any book that had that sort of aesthetic. But then I start to think about a book about endangered species, and I start to think maybe about the precarity of life or about nature. And I don't know, my mind can go in a million different directions because it is a topic that we've all thought about probably since childhood. We learned about endangered species, as kids. Mm. And so it's a topic that's really accessible, mm-hmm. but also really, really sort of open to a lot of ways of thinking. Mm-hmm. So I like the fact that it feels really open. So to me, it was kind of like, I wonder where Sarah was going with it.
Yeah, no, I could, thank you. I could have said the same thing, but maybe not as well. So, but definitely combination of just like trying out different books for partly how they look, and also, it's certainly on the list of things that we probably all are considering, in this probably forever, but specifically in this moment more and more. And if we're taking a moment to like stop and contemplate and maybe like enter or like have a different perspective for a moment from like what the normal chatter in our brain is, like maybe this is something in the mix that can just have a little space to be thought about. So I really like the way you approached it, though. I think that makes me happy to hear that.
Well, good. Well, thinking about sort of the space for contemplation, we're standing here in the sun porch on the first floor of Grey Cliff, and through the window we can see straight out to the sculpture stay that has a bookshelf that is full of books that you've selected for that sculpture. And so it's something this is an opportunity for visitors to sort of think about the relationship between your two bodies of work and to really think about what it's like to sort of, in the positions that we're all standing here, looking at the object, and then we can move outside and sort of be in it. And so for you, I know you haven't had an opportunity to display your work, these two separate bodies of work, in one single exhibition before. So can you talk a little bit about what that means, thinking about sort of a viewer being able to sort of engage with one and the other at the same time?
Yeah, I think this is really thanks to you and Zach that this is like that we were talking about this, and Anna. And I know when we talked about placing the works inside and outside, and you both had vision of like where things would go, and this in particular, we were wondering about like which piece would be more appropriate here. And I know that you guys were really excited to have this piece close for this relationship, and I'm really happy that it worked out like that. It just is, it is this kind of relationship to see both of these works together. And like this, I think, the way this room was set up, it is this kind of like lounge. It is a reading. It is kind of I always think of that piece as a reading room, and this space, I think, in the house functioned a little bit as a reading room. So it's kind of fun to have those two in proximity.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of like what is really the difference? Yeah, right. It's a glass-walled concrete structure in which you could sit and read.
Yeah. Right.
And as it stay,
But the placements do like really exemplify this relationship between putting this work of yours inside of this and around this Frank Lloyd Wright house, right? I mean, instead of working in opposition to the design and the translucent nature of this house, these placements actually kind of build upon it, right? And we're seeing right from the inside of the house through a piece, through the window, into one of your outdoor works, and actually out the other side of it, and extending the conversation between these interior works all the way outside of the house, and expanding the footprint of the house in doing so.
Yeah, it's been, that part's been totally thrilling.
Well, one other thing that we had a question that this is a good opportunity to think about. The question from an audience member, Al from East Aurora, was asking about the glass. These panes of colored glass that you can actually see in this work, the way that they're constructed, there appears to be sort of a film. Can you talk about how this color is achieved with the glass?
Yeah, these glasses, it's a laminated glass, so there's a laminate in the center and two pieces of glass that get annealed with a heat treatment and pressed, which I work with a fabricator to do. I can't do that in-house. And you can layer up to four layers of laminate, so I have a little like box of little pieces of glass that I can layer up and hold, and I can literally mix color, which is one of the reasons that I really wanted to. Some of the earlier sculptures are made out of plexiglass, and in addition to kind of some harsh, like the chemical bonding that I had to do to get those things to stick together, which I was feeling started to be a health problem. It also was limited in you get what you get. And I was actually layering the plexiglass, getting really thin layers of plexiglass and layering them up myself to mix the color. But this is just this way of having this almost infinite palette, which is really like amazing and such a thrill.
So it's clear glass, colored laminate, and then cleared glass.
Yes, exactly.
And then you can choose, so if you wanted...
4 layers of laminate, so...
And if you wanted to sort of deepen the saturation, you could sort of
do... Yes, so you could do, like if you're doing blue and red to make purple, you could do one blue and one red, two blue and one red, two red and one blue, or if you just want a deeper blue, you could do up to 4 blue, so it's really, it's really fun. And then, of course, with when you're working with something with 4 or 5 sides, then you also get the mixing that happens when you're layering up the, from side to side and top to bottom, and the reflection that happens. So.
We're standing with the piece Blue Coffee, which is a work of Sarah's that I've been personally very drawn to the entire time we've been looking at her works. There's a lot of themes that we see in a number of pieces of Sarah's, but this work in particular kind of really highlights this reverence that you put into everyday objects and utilitarian materials. And it might be a bit of a secret, but this piece looks like the main frame is made of plywood, but it's actually not. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about what it's made of and why you chose to do that.
Sure. So the structure of this piece, this wood and coffee cup are all cast aluminum, and then they're welded together after the separate pieces were cast. And then this obviously is a glass cube. So I think you asked me earlier, when I started making the cast works, and I think the first cast piece I did was actually I was asked to do an edition for a fundraiser for an auction. And that's when I started to think about casting, and got hooked up with a pretty small scale aluminum casting company near my house, and working with the guys there. And I kind of liked the first few things I cast were just 2x4s and plywood, and kind of different offcuts, and then just had those welded together. It just felt like there's something to kind of this permanent. I mean, I guess that's all casting and bronze included. Anything is just this kind of taking something that is more ephemeral, and it's just you kind of it's like a snapshot of this moment, and it's not it becomes a little bit more permanent. Nothing's permanent, but it becomes more permanent than it would be in wood. And I also just really loved, I mean, like you talked to, it's the plywood is kind of this, and this is this particular plywood is a pretty low grade, the knots aren't filled, and those things become the things that are so beautiful about it once it's cast, and the things that you can kind of really visually are so beautiful.
There's also a removal somehow. There's when so often you're working with found objects that are as they are.
Yes.
And here you're sort of taking one step from that found object in a different direction, and I don't know necessarily what that direction is, away from it and towards something else. Right, yeah. But there's something really, once you learn that this coffee cup isn't, a ceramic coffee cup, but it's a cast of a ceramic coffee cup, there is sort of this mental remove that happens. I don't know if that's something for you.
Yeah, I think I know what you mean, and to me there's also, it's a little bit of humor, they're just kind of it's a little bit blunt, this kind of take the coffee cup, and when I was working with the guys making this piece or pieces like it, I just they would just laugh at me, I mean, for them it's just oh, put the coffee cup here, and just I really enjoyed that part of it. It was exposing almost the stupidity of the project of sculpture. I mean, it's a lot of other things as well, but just I liked that they kind of seeing it through their eyes, and they also could delight in it and love it, but it wasn't without this kind of exposing the whole practice as this kind of goofy arranging for my imagination. So I think it's different from when I'm physically kind of putting wood together myself or something like that. There's sort of a little bit of a remove and maybe like a goofiness to this.
There's with some of the sculptures elsewhere in the house, there's, you see the door in Massachusetts and you think about the sort of life that door lived, and this, these didn't have that, right? It's like almost if we go back.
It's a little ghost or something. Yeah, I feel like the casting, it's like a little bit of ghost or aura or like more like that. I do, I get that too.
And I remember you also talked about, you've told me about the paint that you use here. It's not just like one normal kind of paint. It's sort of a mixture.
Well, originally I was experimenting with anodized aluminum, which is like really this chemical adhesion that isn't a paint on top. It actually is a changing of the surface of the molecules that are on the surface to change it to a color. And I have had mixed results with that. I'm like interested in doing some more experimenting. So some of what you see is that anodized, and then places where it wasn't doing what I wanted to do, I just used like a over the counter car, like the spray paint that you can get in an auto body shop. And then in other places I've used acrylic paint and sealed it. So it is just kind of an amalgamation of different kinds of paint to get the color, and also the different levels of reflectivity and matte that I was looking for.
Something else separate but interesting to me about this work and where it's placed, when Andrea and I were working on curating your work in this home, we were lucky enough to have the ability to engage with some of the existing furniture in the space and place this work here. And there's so many themes around domestic life in your work. And I think I was wondering if you can kind of tell us about this idea of placing your works in a domestic space.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've all felt so lucky, and thanks to Anna for allowing us this liberty of taking this historic place and allowing us to really like get in there. Yeah. But I love the gallery. I love the museum. We run a gallery, you run a museum. It's not in opposition to any of that, but it just, for me, like if I ever like let go of a piece into the world, like I would just always want to see where it ends up in somebody's home. That's like that's where people have the closest relationship to object for the most part, and certainly like the artwork I have in my house, I'm going to have the closest, most intimate relationship with, just because it's day in, day out. And in this place, just with all this light, this shifting light throughout the house, it's been amazing to see, enable these pieces to be really different, like throughout different times of day. And just how they speak to the different pieces of furniture in the house has been, it's felt really lucky that we got to just kind of get involved in all that.
We are in Isabel's bedroom, and as we know, this is sort of the master bedroom for this house. Isabel was the person who sort of spent the most time here. This was the house that she sort of dreamt up as having a little bit of an escape from the city, and being able to be here and enjoy the lake and enjoy the landscape. And we really wanted to place an object in this room that sort of felt personal in the way that this house is personal to Isabel. And to me, there was no more sort of intimate, scaled object than her house, because it is the smallest piece in the exhibition, And it just has this sort of quiet internal power that really draws you in a way that makes it feel really it's so much more powerful than the scale sort of belies. And it was important to me to give this sort of smaller sculpture an important place in the house, in the master bedroom. So can you talk a little bit about the scale of this piece and sort of relative to the other pieces in the show?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I definitely enjoy making this scale of kind of tabletop work. Sometimes it feels like they, like in this piece in particular, could be a little bit, could be like a model for a larger piece. Just in imagination, it wasn't specifically like that, but I enjoyed that this piece really, like you had alluded to, it really you can really feel the interior. So to me, this piece, and it wasn't an intention. It was just kind of what happened. Was it just felt like it was kind of speaking to interior or inner life, like especially the way, like if you look in, the light inside is very different from the light outside because of the even like on a diffuse cloudy day like today, the light inside is so different from the way it is out here. So it does to me speak to just like just to inner life of and her house, I guess I didn't have one specific woman in mind. I have like a lot of women in mind, and also just like how often, how women, I mean, I'm just kind of, this is just coming to me right now, so we'll see how it goes, but just this, this women's places in the home, and like how, not everybody, but historically there has been this domestic tie towards child rearing and caring and cooking and all that takes place in the home. And just, I guess what I'm feeling and thinking about is just that relationship between how, in some ways, like the woman's relationship to the house, and how and if that can be a reflection or of inner life. And yeah.
Well, there is just I love especially sort of that interior light that you talk about, sort of that, it feels like radiant in there, almost like there's somehow a light that's being emitted. Yeah. But it's just what's happening because of the colored glass. And what's really special about this piece, I think, among many things, is that it's an opportunity to see the color mixing of different panes of glass. So when you actually walk around, you start to sort of do color mixing, like as if you were mixing paints on a palette or something. You can actually sort of see what this looks like plus this glass, right? If you stand at the right angle, and you can also see what these pieces of glass look like on their own if you look at them through other angles. And so it invites this sort of interactivity and has me move around it in a way. And so then I experience it like very separate from myself. And thinking about it as her house then just creates this sort of almost like sacred specialness. Like I'm not in it, right? But I'm just like in awe and separate from it and looking at it.
Yeah, I think that I mean, I definitely have experienced, and then kind of want to, when I'm making a work, or I've experienced some of the works that are where the color really layers up and changes as you move around. I really love that. I like just being drawn around a sculpture. Like I always kind of have thought about sculpture, or just it's been a pretty traditional relationship where it's like in the round, and you want to, like, if it's moving you around, it's kind of it's doing its job and offering something different from where it is. And yeah, I just like really love how like the glow, you know, even when I put my hand in there, it changes color. Like the wood glows a different color depending on where you are. And again, like those things just never, I just never get tired of those like very small, subtle, phenomenological experiences. And even like on this tiny scale, I get a thrill from being able to experience that.
So Sarah, we were just inside the house and talking about sort of what it feels like to look at these objects from the outside, and we were observing them separately from ourselves. And now we get to sort of be inside of one of your objects here with Stay, this sculpture that's outside on the grounds. Can you talk to us a little bit about what it's like for you as a maker to make this transition to making work that people can actually enter into?
Yes, that's a good question. And it's one that I feel like I kind of stumbled into. It wasn't a conscious decision. Aside from making forts and structures growing up as a sculptor, I did a little bit, but I always had this voice inside my head that was editing a desire to make something that someone could go inside. Maybe it felt a little bit, I don't know, sensational is wrong, or like corny, or just like, it wasn't like the traditional like sculpture in the round, classic, what it was supposed to be. Yeah. And what would happen is that I'd be making these things in the studio, and they would kind of be structure-like, and you know, especially like one of my kids would be there, my youngest kid would be there, he'd be like in the thing, you know, and I'd like throw some books in there for him to look at or something, Legos for him to play in. And the thing just started to be more and more of actually a structure that felt really good to be inside. And I wanted to be inside it. And then eventually I just let go of whatever was like blocking me from just allowing the thing to be what it needed to be. And then now it just feels more like that's like a freedom that I have. Like if the thing needs to be something you can go inside, then I'm allowing myself to do that.
And when a viewer comes and experiences a piece and they do go inside, what do you hope they take away from that experience?
Definitely this. I feel like it's it kind of hopefully like deepens the engagement, that there's an intimacy that happens when someone makes a decision, or even if they don't make a decision, but their body just like gets drawn in there, that potentially just has a different, it's like a deeper or different relationship with the physical object. For one, like your body just feels different if it's actually has this mass around it. And that all those things are linked, so like visually, spiritually, physically, hopefully who's ever interacting with the sculpture can have a more intimate relationship with the thing. It was funny, on the drive up here, I'd read the questions last night, and things were just like percolating in my mind, and it just came into my mind like cave. Like, and wondering, like, is that why we like these? You know, like, is it this old, very, very old thing that makes us feel safe when we're in this small space, and feel like we can be vulnerable, and feel like we can like take that moment to pause because maybe we're not on guard and like, you know, looking for danger. I don't know.
No, and I mean, I've heard you say the word contemplation a lot, like around these spaces, and we saw inside with the piece Reading that you included a book in that work, and then in this piece there's a number of books on the shelf, and I was hoping you could talk a little bit about why you include the books. We also got a question sent to us from Stevie asking how you pick the books that go inside of these works.
Yeah, I mean, going back to the original, like how these kind of structures started, it really did start with me like putting books in I always had books in the studio anyway, and then like I would bring kid books for, books to, engage my son, my kids, and then it did start with that. I think it never would have occurred to me to put a book in a sculpture, and actually I think again like I had a mental block of not wanting a book to be an intimidation or blocking someone for like, I don't know, being too brainy, or like having it be like about being intellectual or showing off, or I don't know, just like somehow that maybe that could be a block. And again, like I just had to get over that and realize that, and just instead look at what was actually happening when people would come in and just like be happy to be in this thing with a book, and how it was like people were actually responding, and I was responding in this way where it felt like it was just offering this opportunity to just stop whatever it was, and like, again, like look at something that's not a phone, and not be doing anything, not be producing, not be, solving any problems, just be taking it in, and allowing that, and I'm hoping that I can offer that to people, that the thing can be that. And in terms of where the books come from, the most of them come from this beautiful book shed at my local transfer station. And it's just a take it or leave it book exchange at the dump. And yeah, I mean, it's such a beautiful place. And sometimes I find books I want to include, and I'll order them from like a used book site, or I'll go to used bookstores, and I always have a ton of books around. And sometimes I'll just take books off my bookshelf. So it's just a lot of it's just like things that I would want to look at, pretty much, but also I think that, and I just want to make an effort to also just for it to be inviting, to just be like, there's something for anybody.
Yeah.
One of the things that I love to think about also with these sculptures is the color, the glass. Today it's the light is diffuse, but on a bright sunny day, the circles of light that are sort of cast into the sculpture, when you're inside of it, those light rays land on your body. And so thinking about sort of that meditative contemplation that you were talking about, it sort of forces you into that, because you sort of start to become almost part of this object, and you sort of are bathed in the light of the sculpture. And I think we kind of have to talk about the light and the color here. So can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I can't not like think about the way colored glass and architecture has worked, and certainly in terms of like structures built around trying to make space for spiritual connection, whether it's mosques, synagogue, church, or beyond, and also just even like in a broader sense in the history of art, like even in landscape painting, like the way you have, the luminists or whatever, the spiritualists, like the light, the way the light hit the ground or hit a tree or hit the water, that was, in the artist's mind really with the intention of communicating about, or like asking the question of like, what is spirit, and how do we experience spirit? And so I definitely, I'm interested in those questions, and I'm excited when, like anytime, I mean, anytime the light comes and like makes a color that wasn't there before, it's just like every time it's like, what, it just feels exciting and magic. And even like right now when we're standing here and there's no light that's like projecting an actual projection, but we have a lot of reflection. So right now we're seeing the ocean, or it always feels like the ocean here because it's so big. We're seeing the lake in the, the pine tree. We're seeing the reflection of the color of this bookshelf reflected on the back. And like, I mean, that stuff, again, like every time I'm so excited by that. And I love how it's ungrounding. It's hard to tell like what tree is behind there, which tree is being reflected in there. I think about Dan Graham a lot, of course, with when these, especially when these things start to happen, and like what can happen when I am disoriented, and like the possibility of what can happen on a psychological or spiritual level inside my being when I am disoriented and I don't really understand what's happening, and like that, making space for that like unknown, like knowing that I know nothing really becomes apparent when these phenomena, these like very simple, totally simple day-to-day phenomenons happen.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, we've definitely seen visitors kind of like experience that sense of awe when the light comes through them and they're like bathed in one of these dramatic colors, and it's been fantastic to see. So we're here on the grounds of a Frank Lloyd Wright property, and while some of the outward appearances are definitely different between your work and his, there's a lot of similarities in terms of the materials used. Your pieces have concrete and colored glass, and we'll see similar materials inside of the house. Can you talk a little bit about the relationship of your work and his, and maybe tell us a little bit about how these monumental pieces come into being?
Sure. I guess I'll start by saying about how these are made. These pieces were made at a local concrete fabrication factory, and the forms are, this hoop form is kind of a generic form that is used for making drainage culverts, as well as the other one I think is more for like electrical. It could be drainage or it could be for electric or sewer. So the pieces are, the way these are made is basically the same way that somebody that was trying to put a sewer system together, or put an electrical system underground, where a lot of times they would use a general form, and then whoever the customer was would specify where the holes are for where the drainage would be, or different pipes. And basically I work the same way with the fabricator, Mike, who we both got to know a little bit here locally, who was amazingly generous and worked with us to get these pieces how we wanted them, and worked on just where the openings would be and how structurally the thing could still be supported and transported, and be able to maintain these kind of openings. And one of the things I like about what I've been really enjoying about working with this material and this this kind of like product, in some ways, for me it feels, it operates a lot like a found object, even though we did organize the openings and the form and chose the size and all these things. It still feels like I'm engaging with something that actually exists in the real world already. And I don't know why that's a comfort for me, but it just is just how I work. I tend to feel more comfortable working with an object to start, and then kind of riffing off that or seeing what would intersect with that. So these, and then they just, the other thing I really have enjoyed getting to know about these things is that, and what I kind of appreciate about them is that they don't care about the weather. They're made to be buried underground. They have, an innate kind of resilience and kind of fortitude that is like a comfort for me even just in a practical way. Outdoor sculpture can be kind of, can be a problem in terms of trying to figure out how to make things that can stand up and just kind of be at one with the environment and not give a shit. So, and the concrete does have this feel of the earth or rock, and I think that definitely has a relationship with the Frank Lloyd Wright architecture, the groundedness of the houses, and this house in particular, the way like the rock is on the bottom part of the house, and then similarly, the house is punctured by these moments of transparency. And from what I understand, this house in particular was one of the first houses where the transparency goes right through. So. The windows in the front and the back of that main area allow for the lake and the air to be seen, through, which is kind of a radical, I think was pretty radical intervention at the moment. And definitely I feel a relationship to that and this and the way I'm kind of, caring about the vistas from the particular views of the different punctures and the openings.
Yeah, and I think you talked a little bit about this, that your comfort with these objects as found objects, and that's something that Frank Lloyd Wright is known to sort of have worked with the natural environment as he found it and worked around it, and so that's also a strong sort of correlation between these, seemingly on the surface different bodies of work, but really sort of embracing what is and working from there seems to be a through point for both of you.
Yeah, I like that. I think that's really true. Just that they're not kind of in a bubble, like it really is about how it sits in the landscape and what's here and what the views are. And I remember it's been really cool meeting a lot of the docents that are trained to take people through this house because they have so much information. And I remember one of the docents was talking about this house because of, who's the woman that commissioned the house? Is it
Isabel?
Isabel had the site issue, so she really needed a lot more light. Like this house is typically the ceilings are higher, there's more light in the house so that she could, more light to make it available for her to see better. Mm-hmm. And it's also one of the first houses that didn't have any colored glass. So we're not having the tinted, stained glass in order also to increase the light in the interior. And one of the things I read afterwards when I was looking up at what this docent said was that I think this is one of the, that there was a shift where he stopped using the colored glass because he realized that without these kind of the decorative glass, you actually just see nature. And that he couldn't make a window that was going to be as good as looking out into a tree or the water or something like that. And then that this was also one of the houses that was pretty either the house before or right before falling water. So it's like this kind of evolution of, bringing nature in through this intricate stained glass work into the interior because of a constraint that was kind of from the outside, like this needing to get more light into the house, taking that out, and then realizing like, I'll just look at the tree instead of my interpretation of a tree. I thought that was pretty beautiful.
I mean, you have two very dynamic sides to your practice, like the interior works that you construct, and then these large-scale outdoor works. And this is the first time they've ever been able to be shown at the same time. I don't know if you can tell us a little bit about kind of that dynamic between those works and having the opportunity to have them both exist in a place together and how you feel about that.
Well, it's just been really exciting, and I don't think I like thought a lot about it. And I mean, you guys probably did more than me, but just I guess I've just been able to enjoy it. Like where we're sitting now, it's so amazing to be able to look through and see like those pieces through the house. And I know when we were installing, like the three of us were so excited when we would be in the house looking out and like seeing, it was in that downstairs bathroom and looking out and seeing this piece framed in this window, seeing Stay. And yeah, it's just been, for me, it's just, I think I'm at the level where it's just really enjoyable, and I'm not sure really what to say about it other than it's been an enjoyable experience to kind of take that in and like see one thing through another and all that kind of like loop around.
Yeah, I think it's just part of the way that Andrea and I came to your work, and the different parts of it that we each individually became kind of obsessed with, and I can't picture them being separate at this point. There's such a relationship, and especially in this setting where, as you were saying, I mean, the relationship between our view sheds outside to the house, to the works of yours inside of the house, and then vice versa, looking out from inside of the house and seeing these pieces on the grounds is just an incredible conversation, and I think we're really lucky to be able to have it. On behalf of Dr. Andrea Alvarez and myself, we'd like to thank you so much for joining us for this conversation. We'd also like to thank Anna Kaplan and the Grey Cliff Estate for having us out today to film this video.
And we'd especially like to thank Sarah Braman for joining us today for this conversation, for giving us her insights on this really incredible exhibition, and for sharing her thoughts and perspectives with all of you.
Well, thank you both so much. It's been a lot of fun.